Now that we're able to create new customers and show them in a pretty format, like our show page here for Loco Amigo, I want to talk for a few minutes about some of the underlying workings within Sails, some of the things that make Sails tick so that you'll understand the flow as your application functions. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something that we've already been using without even knowing about it, and that's called blueprints. So under your config directory, under blueprints.js, you'll see a whole listing, a whole bunch of documentation related to blueprints, which are automatically created function and automatically created routes within Sails to provide actions and options for you to do things without having to manually set anything up. So in the very first lesson, after we'd set up our environment and we'd set up our customer model, we were able to create a customer by passing parameters in the URL. And that functionality was provided by one of these blueprints. So the first blueprints that we rely on are called actions. So inside of our customer controller, we're creating actions here called new, create, and show. And the actions blueprint, which is enabled by default as it says, even though it's commented out here, the actions, and we'll uncomment that, the actions blueprint automatically creates a route for every action that you create inside of your customer controller, which is how we're able to use rest.view. So automatically, rest.view directs to /views/customer/new. So as soon as that's created, we don't have to manually bind a route for customer/new. That actions blueprint automatically uses that. So the next routes that we use and that are automatically enabled are called the Restful Routes. And REST stands for Representational State Transfer and is a way to provide web services. So this automatically provides web services. So if we create a customer object and go to /customer, that will run customer controller.find. If we go to get /customer and provide an ID, then it will go to the customer controller and find one. And these find and find one functions are automatically created inside of Sails. So we'll uncomment that just so that is also explicit. The last set of blueprints that we rely upon are called shortcuts. And those are how we were able to do the create function automatically without having to enable anything else. The entire framework for executing create was done here in this route, in these shortcut routes. For now, we're going to enable those, but note that it says shortcuts are enabled by default but should be disabled in production. That's because in production, you don't want anybody to have access to things like update, destroy, or create. You want to be able to limit that to operate within the parameters, within the constraints that you set in your application. The next thing that we want to talk about is what's called routes. So these blueprints create automatic routes so that you don't have to go over into routes.js, also inside the config directory, and explicitly configure routes. Notice we have a route already created down here for the root directory. So when you go to localhost :1337, this route was automatically created when you created your Sails application with Sails new. And this view command inside of the route tells it which view to go to. In this case, it's going to homepage. So if we open up Sails, I already have Sails running. If you don't, just press that little green button and start it up. And if we go to the root of our application, it tells us this is a brand new app and we are looking at views/homepage.ejs. And if I hop over here to views, I can open that directory and look at homepage.ejs. And this tells us exactly what we're looking at. And it includes all sorts of other information just like that included on the page. So how to get started creating a sales application. Well, that was fine for a while, but now that's not quite what we want. We don't want the default page of our application to be this ugly views homepage. So instead, we're going to change in routes.js. We're going to change that default view. So the next thing we need to do is create a new view to display. So we're going to make this a static page. And so we're going to put it inside of a new directory called static. And we'll create a new file. We'll just call it home.ejs. The name doesn't really matter as long as we match it up with the route that we're going to create. And inside of this file, let's put a new header. Call it welcome to Node Financial. And for now, you know what? That's all we're going to put on this page. Now if we go back to routes, notice that homepage matches up with homepage.ejs. To redirect the homepage to static/home.ejs, we just need to tell it that. Static/home. And if we regenerate the page, regenerate our site, and open up that home page now, it's going to go to our new page, Welcome to Node Financial. So this home.ejs file, if you remember, all we did was add h1 files here. And if you'll remember back to previous lessons, if we look at the source of that, all of that information that we have in layout.ejs is added around that one little bit of code, that one little bit of HTML that we have in home.ejs. So the very last thing that we'll talk about right now that we've talked about routes and we've talked about blueprints, is how to add some custom CSS to maybe make your site look just a little bit less like garbage. I'm not actually going to make this site look less like garbage, but I want you to know how. So in order to do that, we need to understand how this is set up, how Sails creates your application. If you look under the tasks directory, there's a file there called pipeline.js. Pipeline.js is used by another application called Grunt that puts together all of your files. And notice it creates two variables here. The first one is called CSS files to inject. And the CSS files to inject searches through under your assets directory, the directory called styles, and searches for any files at all that end in .css. The JS files to inject variable is created by searching through your JS directory for any files that end in .js. So all you need to do to include either a new CSS or a new JavaScript file into your template, into your layout.js that's inserted onto every single page that you create, is add them into your assets.js and assets styles directory. And those can be nested within subdirectories however you want. So what we'll do, we're just going to download the Twitter Bootstrap. And the Twitter Bootstrap is a whole set of JavaScript and CSS files that you can use within your application. And they provide very sensible and much prettier defaults and classes, CSS classes and JavaScript functions to enable your application to work. So all we need to do to make those work and to add them to our application is hop on over and click and drag bootstrap.css over into our styles directory. And then WebStorm is going to pop up with this little dialog that we can edit that, and edit the name, change it to whatever you want. And then we're going to add the JS, bootstrap.js, into the JS directory. And to show you that it'll work, I'm just going to create even a new directory inside there called third party. And we're going to move that bootstrap.js into that new directory. Now, so we'll look back at our source code for the site as it is. Notice under styles, we have this one style sheet that's included, styles/importer.css. And at the bottom, we have one JavaScript file, sails.io.js, that is running. So if we reload the page and we refresh this page, look, you'll notice the style of our header changed already because of that new CSS. And if we go back to the page source, now we have bootstrap.css at the top and bootstrap.js included at the bottom. And all of those were automatically pulled in by that pipeline.js file. If we look back at views at layout.ejs, this has automatically been updated with Bootstrap and Bootstrap. So that's it. We've covered blueprints, we've covered routes, and we've covered the pipeline in order to add new JavaScript and CSS files to your homepage and to all of the pages inside of your application. So as always, the last thing we're going to do is modify this, and I'm actually going to do this in a couple commits. So the first one, we're going to add layout, bootstrap, and bootstrap, and we're going to say add bootstrap to application. We'll commit that. And then we'll add blueprints, and we will explicitly enable blueprints. If we look at the changes here, all we did was uncomment those blueprints that are enabled by default. And finally, update static homepage. So that's 3 different commits. We'll structure our commits based on the functionality that is included in each of those. And finally, we will sync.